Victorians were known for their proper manners and elegant fashion, but they also had some bizarre habits that will make you question everything. From people putting raw meat on their faces to the creepy tradition of coffin births, the Victorian era was wild. Today we're diving into some of the most shocking and downright strange facts you didn't know about the Victorians. Freak shows were exhibitions of rarities, often featuring individuals with unusual physical characteristics or extraordinary conditions. One of the most famous figures was Joseph Carey Merrick, known as the Elephant Man, due to his physical appearance caused by a congenital disorder. His left side was overgrown and distorted, leading him to wear a mask for most of his life. Victorian freak shows were undoubtedly one of the creepiest aspects of society at the time. Before modern science and medicine, superstitions surrounding death were common. For example, deceased persons were carried out of homes feet first to ensure that the dead spirit would not beckon others to come with them. Windows were shut and curtains drawn so that the soul would not depart before the funeral. Pictures and mirrors were also covered to prevent the soul of the deceased from getting trapped inside the house. These and many other traditions dominated Victorian funerary practices. The thought of surgery can make many of us uncomfortable, but be thankful for modern medicine. Victorian surgery was hellish in comparison. There were usually many students overseeing, bringing all kinds of dirt and germs to the operating table, as nothing was sterilized. Worst of all, without the invention of anesthetic until the mid-1800s, procedures were quick but seriously painful. Major operations sometimes took less than a minute, but the brutal nature of surgery meant that survival rates were slim. People used to use mummies for medicine, which is part of the reason we have so few mummies today. It was believed that human remains could cure anything from a headache to epilepsy, with bones, blood, and fat used as remedies. Mummy powder, exactly what it sounds like, was mixed into drinks or used as seasoning. It was also common to hold mummy unwrapping parties, where the wealthy would purchase a mummy and hold a party to unwrap it. Polluted water may not sound strange today, but Victorian water pollution was due to a lack of knowledge about waste disposal. Known as the Great Stink, central London in 1858 used the river as a sewage system, causing a huge stink during hot weather. Industrial waste, animal waste, and even the dead were dumped into the river, leading to severe contamination. The smell was so bad it caused people to vomit, and the contamination led to cholera outbreaks, killing tens of thousands. Victorian times were not about smelling good, as people did not bathe as often as they should have, nor did they have the products or really care about their hygiene. This lack of hygiene contributed to the rampant spread of diseases. People would wash their clothes, but to remove stains, they used charcoal or kerosene, and sometimes milk to get rid of odors. For bleaching, they often used their own urine. Toothbrushes and toothpaste existed, but only the upper and middle classes could afford them. The lower classes had to find alternatives, like using celery as a toothbrush and making toothpaste from household items. Toilets existed, but without plumbing, waste dropped into a cesspool, which would eventually be emptied and sold as fertilizer. A child's childhood in the 1800s was quite different from today. Wealthy children were raised by nannies, while poorer children were sent to work as early as possible, sometimes as young as 4 or 5, especially during the Industrial Revolution. Many children did not receive much education, instead working in dangerous factories, mines, or as chimney sweeps. The death rate was high, and life expectancy was low. In the name of beauty, people have done some crazy things, and Victorian beauty regimes were not for the faint of heart. Strange face masks were a typical part of skincare routines, aiming to maintain a person's complexion and youthful looks. One mask forced the user's face to sweat throughout the night. Another claimed to let poisonous gases out, but the weirdest of all involved strapping raw meat to the face. Even if it didn't restore youthful skin, it certainly turned heads. While it might seem strange today, taking pictures of deceased loved ones was not unusual in the Victorian era. Photography was expensive. So many poor families had never taken a photo before. Upon death, families would pool money to have a photograph taken, often with the whole family posing with the deceased. Dead children were dressed in their best clothes and propped up on pillows to appear alive, while the elderly were held upright by the waist. This practice is now known as post-mortem photography. Women's dresses in the Victorian era were so large that they often got stuck indoors. Crinolines, wooden hoops, layered with skirts, created the appearance of a huge skirt. These dresses were not only cumbersome, but also extremely flammable, leading to many accidents. As you can guess, the trend of wearing crinolines did not last long. Victorian asylums were notorious for their brutal and inhumane treatment of patients. The mentally ill were often locked away in overcrowded, filthy conditions, where they were subjected to cruel treatments. Restraints, ice baths, electroshock therapy, and even lobotomies were used in an attempt to cure the insane, all with minimal care and no regard for their suffering. These institutions were places of torment, where many patients spent their entire lives in darkness and neglect, with little hope of ever seeing freedom again. In the 1800s, some babies were referred to as blue babies due to a lack of oxygen in their blood, causing their skin to take on a bluish hue. These children, born with congenital heart defects, were often abandoned or dismissed as cursed. Without modern medical knowledge, many of these babies didn't survive, their fates sealed by a society that had no way of understanding the medical conditions that caused their strange appearances. In Victorian times, food adulteration was a widespread problem. Unregulated food markets often contained dangerous additives that could cause illness or even death. People were unknowingly consuming items like arsenic-laced candy, lead-filled wine, and sawdust mixed into flour. The lack of food safety regulations meant that what was sold to the public was often contaminated, and many people fell ill from the hidden dangers lurking in their daily meals. It was a terrifying time when the very food that sustained life could become a silent killer. Victorian workhouses were a grim reality for the poor. These institutions, intended to provide shelter and employment, were places of suffering and abuse. People who were unable to support themselves were forced to enter workhouses, where they were made to perform backbreaking labor in exchange for the most meager of rations. Families were often separated and conditions were deplorable. The harsh and dehumanizing atmosphere of the workhouses made them feared by the poor, who would do anything to avoid them. The baby farmer scandal shook Victorian society to its core. In a time when unwed mothers faced harsh judgment and social ostracism, some turned to baby farmers, women who would take in children for a fee, claiming to care for them. However, many of these so-called caretakers were responsible for the deaths of infants under their care. Baby farmers like Amelia Dyer were found guilty of killing numerous babies for profit, turning what should have been a safe haven into a place of horror. Arsenic was a common substance in the Victorian era, found in everything from wallpaper to cosmetics, and even in food. The use of arsenic-laced products was widespread, with people unknowingly poisoning themselves in their homes. It was used in green dye for clothing and furnishings, in popular beauty products like face powder, and even in the preservation of food. The toxic effects were often slow, leading to long-term poisoning that could result in death. Coffin births. A horrifying occurrence happened when a deceased pregnant woman's body expelled the fetus due to the buildup of gases during decomposition. This unsettling phenomenon shocked those who witnessed it, and many believed it was an unnatural event. In some cases, the deceased's body would even give birth to the baby while it was still in the coffin, adding to the eeriness of Victorian death rituals. It was a grim reminder of the mysteries surrounding life and death during that time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed uncovering these bizarre Victorian facts, don't forget to check out my other videos for more weird and wild history. See you in the next one.